The World Championship record is equalled. Lewis Hamilton wins the Turkish Grand Prix and is a 7-time champion of the world.
Now Hamilton's beginning his mission for title number 8. But does F1 need to be more competitive to drive up revenue? We'll talk to one of the bosses of Formula One and ask about the pandemic paddock, ethics, environmentalism and diversity in the sport. All on this edition of Sport Unlocked. Hello and welcome to the podcast digesting the best of the week's sports news with analysis and interviews. Later, we'll be crossing to Bahrain to the paddock at the start of the new F1 season to hear from one of the sports commercial chiefs. Also, we'll talk concussion, TV rights sales, FIFA's finances, and Qatar human rights campaigns. Well, we've reached episode 10 of Sport Unlocked. Thank you everyone for listening. I'm Rob Harris, and alongside me as ever is Martyn Ziegler.
How are we doing? Yeah, it's the lights at the end of the tunnel as far as we may be concerned in England. I've already got 2 5-a-side matches booked for next week with the return of grassroots sport from Monday the 29th. I know there's a third wave in the rest of Europe, but I think at least for the time being, I'm really looking forward to actually getting out and doing a bit of team sport.
Well, I've actually been in a stadium in the last week, although it was for England 5, San Marino 0. Hardly the most thrilling of matches. Tariq Panja as well with us. Tariq, did you watch it or any of the World Cup qualifiers this week?
No. I'm struggling with international football at the moment. These large empty stadiums, none of the fixtures really jumped off the screen. There was a really good game apparently in Turkey with Turkey winning 4-2 in quite a dramatic fashion. Wished I'd seen that one, but not really. Looking forward to these World Cup qualifiers actually taking shape. You've got to remember, these are the last ones that are going to be competitive. From Qatar onwards, it's going to be just as easy to qualify for the World Cup as it is to not qualify, certainly for your European team, with the expanded FIFA World Cup to 48 teams from 2026. So, guys, if you're interested in World Cup qualifiers, fill your boots because it's not going to be any more interesting than it is right now.
Well, at Wembley, there was no reference at all, really, to the fact the tournament's even going to Qatar, all the concerns. But we have seen in other parts of Europe, some teams at least with some veiled references to human rights questions on Qatar. We had Germany, who lined up before their game with each of the letters of human rights on the tops of the players. And we also saw Norway playing Gibraltar with human rights on their T-shirts as well.
FIFA have made it clear that they're not going to take any disciplinary action for a political statement, which is probably due to the fact they didn't actually reference Qatar directly. I mean, I think that when they were interviewed, the players made no little secret that the issue they were talking about was the human rights of migrant workers in Qatar. Obviously, there's been a lot of focus on that. And but I thought it was actually interesting that FIFA didn't do anything from that point of view, because it does actually make the way open now for other teams to follow suit. So it'd be really interesting to see what happens over the next 18 months.
Yeah. Also, what's interesting is, I guess, the players, which ones you choose to highlight and which ones you don't. We had John Stones at a press conference saying this is an issue that the players are willing to use their platform to talk about. You know, John Stones obviously plays for Manchester City, who are owned by Abu Dhabi, who have pretty much similar issues, perhaps even worse than in Qatar right now, because the one thing about the focus of the World Cup, it's pushed Qatar to some semblance of reforms. You also have Odegaard of Norway, when he's going to be back at Arsenal with Emirates emblazoned on his shirt. It's more than an airline. And then you have a load of Bayern Munich players in the Germany squad who are sponsored by Qatar and Qatar Airways themselves. So it's a complicated one, and the players are going to have to kind of walk a fine line, and they're going to be perhaps asked about this dichotomy.
Yeah, I mean, for example, Erling Haaland, who one of the people who wore the shirts with the Norway national team. I mean, it was only not a few months ago that he had treatment for an injury at the Aspetar Academy in Qatar, and was like did an interview there, absolutely saying how much he was looking forward to coming back to Qatar. And a few months down the line, he's wearing a t-shirt, so a bit awkward.
One thing that did happen in Qatar was the introduction of a minimum wage, 1,000 Qatari riyals a month, which I think works out about £200. So, by certainly British standards, it's not a very considerable amount considering the wealth of the country. But, they do point to some improvements in human rights. And even I noticed the amnesty letter that they sent to FIFA this week was really quite vague in what it was asking for. It was basically asking for enforcement of the changes and not rolling anything back, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I think that's right as well. They've had these rules. These are rules coming into force over the last few years. But that enforcement piece is really, really important. It seems like, with anything, even some of the FIFA rules themselves, ethics rules, whatever you can have the best rules in the world. But if you're not enforcing them, they kind of don't mean anything. And the thing with Qatar, it's such a sort of hierarchical society, stratified society. It has been difficult taking some of these big company owners, some of them royals perhaps, to task over not enforcing the rules that are in place in country. And that's going to be hard. I think what's hurt is this in recent times, the Guardian article recently listing the thousands of workers that have died, and they're trying to separate it from the World Cup to these are projects in Qatar not linked to the World Cup. But the argument, I think is a fair one, is a lot of these projects wouldn't be happening at all at this rate, at this speed in Qatar if there wasn't a World Cup that has to start at a certain date, at a certain time. So you could link a lot of all of this to the World Cup and a lot of these deaths, unfortunately, too.
And if they had open inquests for every death in Qatar, then we'd have the information on all of them. I mean, there was quite an interesting statement from the Royal Belgium Football Association, which said that it expects FIFA to keep its finger on the pulse and to keep putting pressure on Qatar to ensure compliance with the amended labour laws. But then it had this slightly odd part of the statement, which said, paradoxically, Qatar is the only country in the region that has recently taken steps to improve working conditions under pressure from human rights organisations. And it's just not true. They've gone so far in praising Qatar that, they ignore the fact other countries in the Gulf have at least said or implemented some form of labour changes. And it's interesting that they're able to just say something that is just not true in a statement.
It shows how messy all this is, and it will continue to be up until the tournament, and we move on. I hope the interesting thing is what happens afterwards. Let's see, and I won't hold my breath for this. Once the last ball is kicked in Qatar, how much are people going to be looking at and focusing on, what's happening over there? Probably a fair few people in Qatar hoping that this thing just takes place and moves on, and they can get on with whatever it is they were doing.
I mean, I suppose the argument is has having had the World Cup in Qatar shone a light on labour practices within the whole region? And I think the answer to that is absolutely yes, it has. So they may have won the World Cup by slightly underhand means. I'm not saying that the bid committee themselves, but Mohammed bin Hammam, for example, who was the FIFA member then at the time, has been stated by the US Department of Justice as having been involved in allegedly payments in order to win votes. So I think, but the fact they've now got the World Cup and it's there, is it actually going to be beneficial for all these people who were there in very, very large numbers before the World Cup from all different countries trying to make a living and living in absolutely terrible circumstances? Maybe it has had a positive effect, not just for Qatar, but people in Dubai, other parts of the Middle East.
And of course, the World Cup is the main source of income for FIFA. And now we have a new financial report from them, which shows that there's a $900 million insurance cover to protect against any cancellation of the Qatar tournament. That's because they expect to generate $4.67 billion from the tournament. And in this financial report from FIFA, we've also had details of Gianni Infantino's presidential salary. That was $3 million in 2020, including a $1 million bonus. There's certainly cash to fund it, despite pandemic relief payments to national associations reducing the FIFA reserves by $705 million. Those reserves are still at almost $2 billion. And one man who earned a lot out of FIFA over the years was Sepp Blatter. His ban from the game was due to expire later this year, but he's been hit with another suspension of 6 years and 8 months, taking him into his 90s. And that's because Blatter and Jerome Valk, who was his Secretary General, have been found to been awarded themselves huge contractual bonuses while they were at FIFA. So Sepp Blatter's basic salary in 2015 was $3 million, but that was topped up by an $11 million contractual bonus for the 2010 World Cup. And all these FIFA bigwigs also decided that Blatter should earn a $12 million bonus for the 2014 World Cup in Brazil.
I mean, Sepp Blatter's bonuses were far and away of $1 million, weren't they? I mean, oh, my dog's just barking.
He didn't like that figure either, did he, Six?
Well, we do actually have some barking news now on some other football finance. It's actually just coming in from Italy, where the Serie TV rights have been awarded for the next 3 seasons to DAZN for €840 million a year. And they're calling it DAZN one of the largest sports streaming deals in history. It squeezed out Comcast-owned Sky, although they could still come in for 3 of the games each weekend that can be shared with another provider. Tariq, this seems a pretty significant deal from DAZN.
In the end, the biggest check won out, but it hasn't been easy. A number of clubs wanted to stick with Sky, even though there was going to be less money on the table for a number of reasons. One, Sky's been a loyal partner all these years. It gives them a degree of certainty. It's someone they know. And for DAZN, there was some obstacles to overcome. There were lots of questions of whether it's got the ability to stream matches across the country at volume in a place where the broadband network hasn't been great. There were issues of buffering, etc. But it looks like DAZN has been able to now convince a minimum of 14 of the Serie A clubs, a number that was needed to get the deal over the line, that it can deliver not only on getting the games across, but also on its financing. The company is an interesting one. It has been one of the biggest buyers of sports rights across markets in Europe, in Japan, in the US as well, where it broadcasts boxing and martial arts sports. But it's not turned a profit yet. It's losing huge amounts of money every year. The most recent results available, which are for the 29 financial year, show it lost $1.3 billion. That's an enormous amount and a number it will want to turn around quickly. It's backed by the billionaire Len Blavatnik, but even with his largesse, even with his wallet, it cannot continue making losses at this rate. So, yeah, this is a huge bet by DAZN on its future. There is speculation now that after signing these Serie A rights, it will perhaps set the stage for a stock listing, an IPO. There's also been talk for more than a year that it plans to be gobbled up by one of the bigger television networks, perhaps. It has an interesting slate of sports rights, and it also has perhaps the best-in-class technology for what it does, streaming sports across different platforms. There is value in that, but it's uncertain what's going to happen. And for some of those Serie A clubs and for people watching, that also is a bit of a red flag. There is a sense that perhaps now is not the time to take such a risk. You don't have to look very far for a league, one of the big leagues, who have tried to go with a new partner and come unstuck. France, the top leagues there, they signed a deal with Spanish company Media Pro. There were fist pumps. There was great excitement there because they got more than €1 billion per season. This was a 70% uplift on what they were getting from Canal Plus, the broadcaster that has been in lockstep with the league for 2 decades. A move away from Canal and a move to this new company, Media Pro. But within 2 months of the new season, the new contract starting, it collapsed. Media Pro has now disappeared. The rights had to be retendered. The billion euros has disappeared too. The rights, at least in the short term, have gone to Canal, which rode to the rescue, unhappily, and has the rights for the rest of this season following an emergency auction. And now the league is gearing up for selling its rights again in the future. There is no way that they will get anywhere near the billion euros that Media Pro got the company. It was also a huge embarrassment for Ligue 1 and the executives there. And it's unlikely that it will recover in the near term, or perhaps even in the medium term. So all eyes on Serie A and its deal with DAZN. Let's see if it works out, and if it doesn't, let's hope it isn't the catastrophe that we saw in France.
We've also had some more TV rights news this week. The English Football Association selling the rights for the first time to the Women's Super League. Previously, effectively, the broadcasters were just funding the costs. It's a package worth more than £20 million over 3 years, with Sky Sports and BBC getting the rights. Crucial thing is Sky Sports going to be giving a lot of coverage around games, but also the fact that the BBC won't just be putting the games that like they had previously only on their interactive services, but on BBC 1 and 2. So for me, away from the money, it's more about exposure. Suddenly these games are going to be on the BBC's main channels, which means actually they could be amongst the best rated women's football games in the world. And also they could potentially, in Britain at least, outrate some Premier League games, which are obviously only on their subscription TV.
I think the money's good and it's fine, it's a good sign, but way more significant is this coverage. If it's on mainstream, I think it's almost, on BBC One in particular, it's almost certainly going to be the most watched league in the world, more than anywhere else, given that BBC One is this free-to-air nationwide channel, plus what Sky are talking about, all-encompassing coverage similar to the men's game, pre-match, post-match, etc. These players will become household names, perhaps, and I think significantly, if there is finally this big audience, maybe we'll see fans going to the stadiums in bigger numbers than we see currently. I think even in the Premier League, in some cases, we're still talking about hundreds of people going to games on a weekly basis. So you can't now say, with this platform they're being given, that they're not getting this chance to grow the game in a way that they deserve and one they have to run with. Now it's a case of, right, the tools are there, crack on, do it, and let's see the results soon. It's very exciting.
One of the things I discovered when going to Wembley for England San Marino was the new Amazon Fresh store that's open next door to Wembley, where you just walk in, pick up your products and walk out without ever actually interacting with anyone or scanning anything. Of course, it's the latest sign of the expansion of Amazon on the high street, and also Amazon expanding in sport as well. More rights, aren't they?
Yeah, so they're looking very closely at the home nations rugby rights. So the Six Nations are selling the rights for the Six Nations tournament and the autumn internationals together. So we have a slightly unusual situation now, where they're going to be. It now looks the most, what broadcasting industry sources think the most likely split is going to be Amazon taking the autumn internationals, and the terrestrial TV channels, BBC and ITV, keeping the Six Nations, which means BT and Sky Sports are sort of have lost out. I think there's a bit of a feeling at BT and Sky that Amazon gets a bit of a free ride, and it's not seen so much as a pay TV service. But I suppose for rugby fans who are used to watching the Six Nations on terrestrial TV, that will be very, very welcome if that's going to remain, which it now looks as though it is. Because I think politically it would have been quite difficult for that to be sold off just to a pay TV platform, and with all that, what all that means about viewer numbers, participation, and taking the game a bit further forward.
Well, taking Sport Unlocked a bit further afield now to the Gulf, and joining us direct from the Formula One circuit in Bahrain, at the season opening race weekend is F1's Director of Partnerships, Ben Pincus, to look ahead to the new season. Ben, welcome to Sport Unlocked.
Thank you very much. Great to be here. I apologise for any sound in the background. I'm at the racetrack and our first free practice has just started.
So what's it like in the pandemic era, going to the races, being around the races? It must be so different from the normal times with all the sort of the liveliness around.
Yeah, no, it is. It's definitely very different. It's noticeable. Car parks are empty, and there's obviously a lot less going on. But it's the way we've got used to working.
I was going to say, does it feel more like, it's going to sound funny, more like work? Because as someone been to some of your paddocks, etc., and it's like a bit of a festival as well. The atmosphere. There's all sorts of characters back in the day. Oh, look, there's some musician there, a Premier League footballer over here, etc. It's suddenly the world's celebrities, athletes, these A-listers are all kind of knocking about, while these elite Formula One drivers are preparing for the race of their lives.
Yeah, no, it probably, it's a great analogy. It probably does feel a bit more like work. You've obviously got a lot less going on. So what you lose, I guess, in sort of razzmatazz and energy from the outside world coming in, you are actually functioning more as if you're a more traditional sort of working environment.
One of the things.
So we're definitely a lot more efficient than we would be normally.
Yeah, but one of the paddock experiences, often even as when I'm there as media, you'll sort of be able to wander in and out of each motorhome. Some of it might be actually tasting some of the culinary delights on offer, as well as to chatting to people.
Can't do that anymore, mate.
No. When do you think that will return? Is there a sort of moment in the calendar you're thinking it might look more normal?
Yeah, we're hoping that we will have we'll have fans back in Portugal. So that's just over 4 weeks. We seem, all the signals there are very positive for a restricted fan event. So that will, that will enable us to open up a lot more. We'll still, as a Formula One entity and all the teams, we'll still maintain, the bubbles and the restrictions around the bubbles. So it won't be that different an experience for us, because we have to then continue going to other races in other countries and maintaining the protocols around safety to ensure our sort of ease of passage through other countries. So it won't probably make a massive amount of difference to us directly, but you'll inevitably get the energy of seeing crowds coming into circuits in the morning and as you leave in the evening, which will make a massive difference.
How much of the transformation in terms of the image of F1 in the last sort of few years changed the proposition commercially in terms of what you're going for? I mean, someone could almost say that F1's gone a bit more woke now. The fact really advocating environmental causes, the anti-discrimination as well. I see, a lot of 0% beer as well being, increasingly sponsored. Is that changed the dynamic?
Exciting, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, I think we're in an extraordinary place. I think it's the culmination of 3.5, 4 years worth of Liberty ownership. I think over the course of those 3 or 4 years, we've tried a lot of stuff out. Probably much. We've been a lot more experimental than we ever had been in the past, and we've figured out what works and what doesn't work. I think we've opened up a whole bunch of new markets, the Netflix deal, various other different content plays has enabled us to connect with audiences in different ways. Add to that, we've got a group of young, new drivers in the paddock this year, which, suddenly make Max Verstappen look old. We've got, what we did with virtual racing beginning of last year around esports. You've got a new car coming in 2022. You've got, what we did last year around, supporting Black Lives Matters, around, messaging around stuff that, maybe in the past we've been a bit more sensitive about, has done it's done extraordinary amounts for us. It genuinely feels to me like as somebody who's been in the business for only 12 months, it feels like all our stars are aligning. And I firmly believed when I started that, all the ingredients were there. If we could get it together in the right order, we'd be sitting on a really, really compelling proposition. And I'm pleased to say, partly by intention and partly by accident, it feels genuinely like those stars are aligning. And if I look at the sort of conversations we're having now in the market versus the conversations we were having 12 months ago, and trying to sort of peel COVID away from that, we're having very different discussions. People are looking at us very differently. I think this time last year, people were interested and engaged, but sustainability was an issue, diversity was an issue, inclusivity was an issue. These are all important pieces for brands, and we weren't able to talk to that particularly well 12 months ago.
Ben, to Rob's point though on those social issues, and you touched upon them. You kind of have Bernie Ecclestone sort of recently. He kind of doesn't believe in some of these things. Is there we're in a kind of culture war, they call it, on social media, etc., with two sides to every argument, etc., even when perhaps there shouldn't be another side to some of these issues. Do you have to be careful about that? Because it's probably, I don't know, there's probably people who get annoyed that sports is used as a platform for some of these causes. I mean, we know there are because they keep speaking up about it. Is that something you're conscious of? And you think, no, these are issues, these are important, and if you're annoyed by it, we don't care.
Yeah, I don't know that we don't care, but I think the first part is true. I think it's important, and we've got a fan base, and we've got a voice. And we should be using that fan base. We should be using that voice. Yes, there are obviously, things can land well to some people, not so well to other people, but that shouldn't be a reason for not doing stuff. There's a sincerity that's real about the sort of gestures. Certainly, I've witnessed here over the last 12 months. It's not. We're not doing it because we think we should do it. We're doing it because we believe we should do it, and we believe things should change. And we're here to grow our audiences. We're here to engage with new audiences, different audiences, existing audiences, and we think it's an important part of the dynamics of our sport. We're very lucky to have athletes who represent different groups, and we should definitely talk about that.
Is that particularly crucial in terms of engaging the young audience that you're trying to bring into the sport, and also keep them watching the long races as well, to actually make them feel like the sponsors, the commercial backers, the messaging around F1 reflects what they're talking about in their daily lives, and the way they are living and thinking about things like electric and environmental causes as well?
Yes, I think it is. I mean, I think there's two different points. I think. I don't know, that one's a bit more emotional than the other, isn't it? I mean, sort of diversity, inclusion, inclusivity is all quite emotional and tends to have quite a lot of emotional charge about it. And we can talk to that in a slightly different way. We recognise that as a sport, we're not as inclusive as we should be. And we need to do more about that. And it's not just about attracting new audiences, it's about a fair representation. If you don't ask yourself these questions, you're never going to change. So I think there's that at one end of the spectrum, and almost it's not necessarily the end of the spectrum, but the sustainability piece is a bit more functional, maybe a little less emotional, a little less charged. I think the way we do that is quite different. If you look at, and again, I've been, overwhelmed by it over the last 12 months. We have a motorsport group of 30 odd people that sit in the middle of the business, and they work on the future of the business from a engineering and from an automotive perspective. And their ambition around a sustainable fuel sitting on a hybrid clean power unit is real. It's not serving, it's a real ambition, and that will be achieved. We're not doing it because it attracts PR attention or because it resonates in a particular way. That's obviously, a great benefit and maybe part of it, but we're doing it because we think it's the right thing to do, because we sit within a sport and a sector that also believe in it.
The other part of ethics is around things like human rights around the world and ethical sponsorship. How much does that come into the mind? I mean, you as F1 are always getting hit with human rights groups writing letters and talking about where you're hosting races and things like that. How do you take that into consideration when making all these decisions around sponsorships and where you're taking F1 to?
I mean, you really do. We have, we're a big public company and a very public sport, and we have to look at everything in detail and in the round, and you have to take a measured perspective on things. And you try and make every decision, in a sort of balanced way as the best you can. It's difficult, but I think it's difficult for everybody, whether you're a sport or, a large company moving into a new market. I mean, it's a challenge for everybody to try and get that balance right.
Lewis Hamilton, now established as one of the great British sports stars of all time, is going for an 8th world title this season. But how important is it for the F1 product to have a competitive title race?
I think it's really important. I think it's an interesting one, actually. We were having this discussion in the car this morning. And I don't. It's a funny one. I mean, maybe you guys have got a view on it as well. But if you look at all other sports and the sports that continue to grow, what you tend to see consistently strong performers, entertaining year on year, and every so often we get a few little upsets. And those upsets could be Liverpool's current performance, or it could have been Leicester a couple of years ago. But there is a consistent rhythm that people sort of, I think, draw a certain amount of comfort from. And I think to be honest, it's a bit of that EastEnders factor. It's dependable and predictable with an occasional upset. And I sort of wonder whether sport is sort of like that. So you need I think people like. My sense is, and I don't have any data to back this up, but my sense is people like that sort of pack of, competitors at the top with the occasional surprise. And the more occasion, the more often that surprise is, the more engaged you could be. But if it becomes too often, it becomes a bit of a mess. I think there's a sort of an expectation that maybe Mercedes are going to have a tough start to the season, and maybe there's a chance for somebody else. I don't know. We should probably have that conversation in halfway through the season. My feeling is there's a lot of energy and excitement around the beginning of this season, and possibly more so than last year, or maybe that's just me reading it wrong. And
perhaps some of that excitement is created by the presence of Mick Schumacher, the 22-year-old son of Michael, making his F1 debut with Haas. Ben, thank you for joining us from Bahrain, giving us some great insight on where F1 is heading this season, commercially, on the track, and trying to build new audiences too.
Thank you very much. I hope you enjoy your weekend.
Thanks, Ben. That's Ben Pincus, F1's Director of Commercial Partnerships, joining us from Bahrain. From the Middle East to Westminster now, and to a hearing of the Digital Culture Media Sports Select Committee this week, looking into head injuries in sport. And there was a pretty combative exchange between the committee chair, Julia Knight MP, and the FA's head of medicine, Dr. Charlotte Cowie. It was all over Knight pressing on just how much the FA has invested on looking into head injury research, the issues of dementia in later life, which of course so much concern. Let's take a listen at Knight's frustration that he couldn't extract a figure out of Dr. Charlotte Cowie.
How much have you actually budgeted as an organisation for research in the last year? How much precisely?
I don't know what our research budget is, but I think we have definitely made a commitment that we will go for the research project.
You're the Chief Medical Officer. How don't you know the research budget? How don't you know your research budget? You've come in front of a committee.
I know the research budget. I know how much is...
Is it because you don't want to say?
Research.
Is it because you don't want to say what the research budget is? Because I cannot believe that someone as eminent as yourself, someone obviously at the top of the tree, so to speak, that you do not know how much the FA spends on this research in the year. I'm almost speechless. Are you telling the
I know
truth?
how much is committed for the funds that we're already paying, so we're continuing to fund the field study. We're continuing to fund another study at Nottingham University.
How much? How much are you spending? How much?
We're spending exactly what we contracted with those people to spend. They asked for the money and we gave them the money. It's not that we have said, no, we can't afford anything more than that. And as I say, if we put this call for research out and the funds required are more, then it's completely up to us to fund that, however big it is, and to seek the money, the funding from within football.
Normally, when we have witnesses who frankly should know a particular figure, and we often suspect, frankly, that they know that figure, but they're too embarrassed to say what that figure is. YouTube, a pretty good recent example of that. What we do is we let them off the hook and we say, will you write to us as a committee? I'll just put on record, I'm staggered, and I think this committee is staggered, that you have not come here today furnished with the information in terms of how much you're spending on research in the last year. I think it's completely unacceptable. Now, I'm not blaming you as a person. I'm sure that you have a very great deal to deal with at the FA. I mean, most people do, frankly. But the situation is that you're in front of a parliamentary committee. We've just been listening to people today, young athletes, who talk about their continence, who talk about the fact that they're fearful for the future and they're worried that they're going to die as a result of their sport. And you are seriously telling this committee that you do not know how much the FA is spending on research into this topic in the last year. That isn't actually a question, that's just a statement, frankly, and I am absolutely appalled. So yes, we'll give you the off the hook, go and write to us and everything else like that, and we'll publish the letter precisely. But I don't believe that. I just think you're too embarrassed. And I can't blame you, because I think I'd be embarrassed.
I'm sorry, can I just
say
please. That in terms of current call for research, there genuinely is no funding limit that we have set on this. We simply want it to be the study that answers our research question. And I can genuinely put my hand on my heart and say we have agreed that there is not an amount of money that we will set for this. We just want to understand what is the best study for us to fund, and we will take external advice from that, and we will try if we need to get money.
Thank you for that, and I do appreciate that, and I appreciate your good intentions. I do, genuinely. I don't wish to be unpleasant in that respect, but I'll give you the external opinion.
Julian Knight MP really haranguing the FA's Dr. Charlotte Cowie there. Martyn, was it acceptable from the DCMS committee chair?
Actually, I think there was a bit wrong in that committee in the treatment of the FA's head of medicine, Charlotte Cowie. She was sort of put on the ropes over concussion, which is fine. You can ask challenging questions, but actually, I mean, I look back at the video. She was interrupted 21 times in 13 minutes. One of her answers was responded to with blah, blah, blah. And 3 of the MPs called her by her first name and then referred to the other scientists as the witnesses by their professional titles. And one of the, Heather Wheeler, even referred to her as Love. So it's interesting this. I put this to the select committee, and I think they haven't quite apologised, but they say they are inviting Dr. Cowie to respond with her experiences so that they can improve the process for witnesses in the future. So what I think the actual news that came out of it was that the FA's independent task force, which is a group from across different sports and science, have recommended reducing heading and training, which it's been talked about as a possibility, but for the adult game, the fact this is a formal recommendation that came out for the first time at the select committee, and as a result of that, it also then emerged that the Premier League is carrying out a study where players are going to wear mouth guards, which are going to register the impact of headers. So you can actually see if it's a long distance kick, one that goes really high in the air, a short range one, the speed of the ball, all these things. When the player heads the ball, the mouth guard will register the force of that impact, and that will feed into the when it comes to deciding what sort of heading should be restricted in training. Because if it's low impact ones, then you may say there's perhaps little wrong in doing that sort of training. But if it's long goalkeepers kicks and the ball's coming down from a great height, then maybe that is one to avoid.
Well, finally on Sport Unlocked, let's turn to Brazil and a rule change that perhaps many managers in the game worldwide would like to see introduced. Tariq, explain all.
Yeah, this was really interesting. Brazil has this kind of hire and fire attitude to a level that I've not seen in many top leagues elsewhere. I remember a time, I think it was around 2014, where I think after game 9, week 9, more than half the teams in the league had fired their coach. So this week, the Brazilian FA said that they voted through teams in Serie A, top league, can only hire 2 coaches because there's a situation where some are paying 4 or 5 different coaches at the same time. Santos, Pele's former club, Neymar's former club, paying 7 currently former coaches right now. That's millions of reais, dollars, whatever they're paying these guys in. That is wasted. And in terms of forming teams as well, each coach comes in and buys the players that they want. It's a total fiasco. So they've decided we need a bit more rationality here. And yeah, if you fire the second one, the person that takes over has to come from within the squad. You can't hire someone else. Equally, a manager can't coach more than 2 different teams per season either. I think it's a sign of how crazy things are in Brazil, but perhaps the right thing to do.
Great, Tariq. Thanks a lot for that. And Martyn, for all your insights as well. Great chatting as always. And it was also brilliant to hear straight and direct from the F1 paddock in Bahrain ahead of the new season there. And thank you all for listening to episode 10 of Sport Unlocked. If you're enjoying us, really great if you could rate, review and subscribe to us on whichever platform you get your podcasts on. Any thoughts, tweet us at Sport Unlocked. Also email sportunlockedpod@gmail.com. For now, thank you as ever and enjoy the sports viewing in the days ahead. Goodbye.